I've seen so many situations where people give money to kids or grandkids and they just can't handle it. And I just had a conversation with a trustee who's also a beneficiary who said, I think we just give the money to everyone. And I said, well, that's not the goal of their parent. And I said, now, if this particular child, because there is a spendthrift in the family, there always is a spendthrift. I've never met a family that doesn't have a spendthrift. But I said, now, if this person were an alcoholic, would you give them an alcohol store? Well, of course not. And I said, okay, so their addiction is money. They can't manage it. If they get a penny, they spend a dime. If they get $1,000, they spend 10. So why would we give them money knowing that what they're going to do? You may think that one of your grandchildren or children are really good financially, only to find out they're not. So take the time to really identify what legacy you want to create, and more importantly, how you can empower your child or grandchild and also protect them at the same time. Hi, I'm Annette Bau, host of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast and founder of the Millionaire Insider. My mission is to help you simplify the money game so you can create a financially secure and fulfilled life without having to have a PhD or spend countless hours on your finances. You're going to learn how to think like a millionaire, stop worrying about money and wondering if your financial house is truly in order, and instead spend your time doing what you love. With over 3 decades advising 7, 8, and even 9-figure millionaires, and now joining that elite group, I'm in a unique position to help you make the best financial choices so you can create a secure financial future and retirement you love. This is the Wealth Inside and Out podcast. Today's free resource is our estate planning checklist. You can go to themillionaireinsider.com/EPC. Our estate planning checklist is just basically a guide that you can go through to make sure that your estate plan is in order. And some of the insight in there may surprise you. I see so many people making so many mistakes on estate planning because they just don't think it through. And this is what I find. And clearly, I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I've been doing this for a long time. And I'm going to share with you some of the most common challenges I see. And one is the estate planning attorney who typically does the estate plan, a lot of times is not really involved as much in the distribution as the financial advisor. So if there are discrepancies or inconsistencies or things like that, it can be a problem. And it can be expensive and it can be a nightmare. So you just want to make sure that right from the get-go, you have everything taken care of. And this checklist is going to help you. So again, themillionaireinsider.com/EPC. For today's show notes, you can go to themillionaireinsider.com/113. Millionaireseries.com copyrights all materials and intellectual property. This information is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to replace any advisor or specialist or to provide any investment, financial, tax, retirement planning, or healthcare advice. By accessing this content, you agree to hold millionaireseries.com and its affiliates harmless for results achieved or not achieved. So let's dive into how and why to use a spendthrift trust. One of the main advantages of using a spendthrift trust is to protect your assets, your loved ones, and even your legacy. I have been advising people literally for 3 decades, and I will say this much: spendthrift trusts are so powerful and so important. And I didn't really get that early in my career. I can remember years ago, I had a client come to me and basically through the assets she wanted purchased for her kids, as well as the way she wanted her trust set up, we were basically creating a spendthrift trust. And at the time, I remember thinking, this is a little overkill. Really? Do we really need this? And oh my gosh, now it's been literally almost 20 years since those trusts were created, and they were God sent. There would be children living on the street if she had not set those up. And unfortunately, I've seen other people who haven't set them up saying, oh, my child is so good with money. Well, they're good with money until they get a bunch of it and they don't realize that $1 million is really not a ton of money. I know it sounds like a lot when you don't have it, but it's not. And it can go by so fast. I remember early in my career, a woman sharing that this couple had won the lottery. They bought $2 million homes. They were traveling, and literally within 5 years, just like statistics share, they were broke. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. But we're going to dive into the definition of a spendthrift trust, why someone needs one. You're going to better understand the roles of the trustee and how to better manage distributions for your heirs. And then you can clarify why it's used and the specifics of protecting the beneficiary from themselves and others. And then we'll also discuss insights as far as the beneficiaries, especially when they're inexperienced, they're impulsive, or they might even have a creditor or legal risk. Basically, a spendthrift trust is just a legal structure that limits how and when beneficiaries can access funds. And I think one of the most powerful tools that I love is to have the spendthrift trust owning assets that generate revenue for the children and allow them to have income for their life. And obviously, if they have an emergency, you can have the flexibility that allows the trustee to distribute wealth. But I will say this much. Now, in doing this again, as I'm 35 years is a long time, the reality of it is that kids who have financial problems and have issues, I don't care what week it is, they're always having some crisis. You just have to be careful that you don't give the trustee too much power to just give cash whenever they need it, because they'll be spending it right or left. And we have some beneficiaries that literally, we really do not give them extra money, because it doesn't matter if we give them $1, if we give them $1,000 or $10,000, it's gone. It is just unbelievable. And so you just got to be aware of the fact that spendaholics or people that have a tendency of overspending or excessive spending, it's as bad of an illness as alcohol or drug addiction. The only issue is that obviously social drinking is acceptable, but if somebody's an alcoholic and they are coming drunk to meetings or they are acting belligerent, people are going to not want to be around them. Whereas when somebody is an overspender and they come and they have the nicest purse or the nicest boots or new jewelry, they get all the attention. So spending can be a real problem because society in many ways rewards it. So you got to be aware of that. And especially sometimes you don't even realize that your kids or your grandkids are spendaholics. I've had situations where my clients thought one of their children was going to have a problem and the other one was great, and it turned out to be the exact opposite. So you just don't know. So why does someone need one? One of the reasons is that sometimes adult children overspend or they lack financial discipline. And sometimes they look like they don't. I can't tell you different situations in my career where people are like, oh, they're so good with money. And I'm like, well, then why don't they have any? It's like, and then dead silence. I mean, it's like, if they're so good with money, they're 40 years old and they don't have any money. If they're so good with money, you would expect them to have accumulated some. This is, I think, more common sometimes with grandparents than it is even with parents, is that they just want their grandkids to be so successful that they create this persona that sometimes is not reality. So again, just something to be aware of, because the reason that's so critical, it's not to make you feel bad, it's to make you be aware that them running out of money, them being broke in retirement is probably the worst case scenario. Now, sometimes it's concerns about heirs divorcing and losing assets. When I moved into our neighborhood over 20 years ago, I was talking to the realtor and he said, oh, it's a real tragedy what happened down there. Because I said, why is that house for sale? And he said, well, make a long story short, they sold the family business. The son got $3 million. 7 days later, his wife filed for divorce and she got half of it. You know, they had been married for a long time. Life was good, or so he thought. Once they sold that business and she had 1.5 million, she was out of there. So again, it does go a long way in protecting assets. Sometimes it's a fear of creditors or lawsuits. I've had children who have had tax problems, and having a spendthrift trust has literally saved them tens of thousands of dollars so that they can negotiate with the IRS, get that under control before they're getting money that the IRS will just take. And then also ensuring that your money is going to last across generations. A lot of people want to build generational wealth, and a spendthrift trust is a very effective way to do that. Another thing that is really powerful about a spendthrift trust is that it can bring peace of mind, because it provides not only an ability to where you can have some influence or some control over your money, but you're also protecting your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and helping to ensure that they don't run out of money. One of the law firms that we worked with over the course of my career, they would always bet on how long it would take for a beneficiary to spend the money. The shortest was like about $250,000. The son inherited, and literally like 10 days later, he was broke. I've seen spouses who their husband's been very controlling about money, and the minute he dies, they are like a little kid in a candy store. It's like they've never developed that emotional muscle that says, I want that, but I'm not going to have it. It's just amazing what happens. And unfortunately, or fortunately, sometimes they get it under control. Obviously, if they're working with me, they get it under control or they're not going to be. But I've literally seen people that if they didn't have the support of me and even some of their children, they would have been broke. It's amazing what happens. And unfortunately, a lot of people lose all their money because of that, and then they end up broke. It's the same thing that happens sometimes when people sell their business. I've known, probably a dozen people who have sold their business or inherited in the tune of like $100 million. And most people think, oh, you could never run out of that. And literally, it's amazing how many have ended up broke. So just something to be aware of. All right, let's look at some of the other benefits. It allows you to secure your estate by aligning your values with the transfer of your wealth. For me, I want my kids to have an income stream at a later point in their life so that they can still have the benefit of learning what it takes to work hard and make it, but then knowing that they're going to be okay financially when they retire. It allows you to reduce risk of family conflict or even financial mismanagement. Now, some of the provisions in your Spendthrift trust, and that will depend on your situation, is making sure you're naming a trust protector who can kind of oversee what's going on in the event there is a problem or some of your money is being mismanaged. And then it also helps to maintain family harmony. It creates clear financial boundaries, which can be really powerful. Now, I personally love to tie guaranteed income into a comprehensive estate planning strategy. And again, the type depends. Some people can take on more risk, others not so much. You got to look at your situation before you ever know what to do. And my only comment there, you've got to use a fiduciary, somebody that has to look at your best interest, not theirs. If you need support on this, you can go to themillionaireinsider.com/SR for support request, or themillionaireinsider.com/support-request, either SR or support-request. All right, let's look at some other benefits of a Spendthrift trust. As we discussed, it protects beneficiaries from poor decisions, legal issues, or outside claims like tax, liens, or things such as that. It allows you to structure distributions based on age, needs, and milestones, when people get money, how they're going to get it, etc. It preserves eligibility for government benefits in certain cases, like if you have a special needs child. A lot of people have heard of special needs trusts. Those are set up so that your child's still going to get the benefit they need and not lose that. Because a lot of times the cost of their care just keeps getting more and more. And as the child gets older, they really need the income your trust can provide because the amount they're getting from benefits from the government is not enough to meet their need. It can be very useful in blended family or second marriages. And it also, as we talked about, preserves wealth for future generations, which many people want to achieve. And I'll just say this much. It's funny how I see people that don't really have money and that are really on their goal to get money, and they are so focused about creating generational wealth. Having raised 3 kids, and they're all doing well financially. I mean, some of them are still too young to really know, but the way they're making decisions is good. When a child's been raised in an affluent home, they just show up differently. They have somewhat of an entitled outlook. And I don't know if it's the fact that they're around so many other kids that also have money or what, but we have gone out of our way to really make our kids contribute, work hard, not just get anything they want. Granted, we've taken nice vacations. We do have different homes, but we have done everything in our power to really try to get them to understand the value of a dollar, the meaning of really doing the work. And it's interesting. Without pointing out specifics of my kids, I have one that's really concerned and very concerned about spending our money. Another one kind of like expects it. It's so interesting. And so I don't know that it's better for a child to grow up with money. I didn't grow up with money, and most of my peers who are wealthy didn't. And we kind of think that's why we're wealthy. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this generation of wealthy kids that really aren't wealthy, but they've had wealthy parents turn out from a standpoint of really getting down the basics of what we have tried to instill in them and what they have seen from our hard work and translating it to their lives. Now, let's talk for a minute about things spendthrift trusts don't do. First of all, they don't eliminate estate taxes. If you have a taxable estate, meaning right now it's over 14 million, now that number is going to change. So just go search it up. Don't take that number. But if you have a taxable estate, then you really need to look at getting an ILIT, which is an irrevocable life insurance trust, where you have your insurance outside of your estate. Now, there are other things you can do with partnerships and a little more advanced estate planning. Ideally, you're working with a really good advisor that can help you. Again, you can go to themillionaireinsider.com/SR for support on that. But some of those things are really important that you're doing additional planning other than just creating a spendthrift trust. A spendthrift trust can't be used to shield assets after a lawsuit or a financial crisis has begun. So that's really important to know. And it's got to be properly established in the state, as well. It's got to be coordinated with your big picture plan. So you've got to have some help from somebody that knows what they're doing. I would also add that it's not a standalone vehicle. You need to make sure it's coordinated with everything. So make sure and make a note of that. All right, so how is it set up? First of all, you want to use an established estate planning attorney, ideally one that specializes also in tax planning. I find those two go hand in hand. It should be integrated with your overall estate plan. That means your wills, your power of attorneys, etc. It requires coordination of your big picture, and a financial planner, a CPA, and your legal team can do a great job to help you do that. Now, this is critical, and this is one thing I see happen a lot, is that people go to all this work of getting this amazing plan, and then they don't have their assets titled properly. You got to make sure that you're looking at it from both an estate planning view as well as a tax and retirement planning. That is absolutely critical. The trustee selection is critical, and that means both the initial trustee or trustees as well as the contingent, and ultimately the corporate. You always want to have a corporate trustee named in the event that you don't have individuals that can serve. And then last but not least, you got to revisit and review it regularly. As you have changes in your life, you've got to redo your estate plan. That is so important. All right, let's talk about a couple case studies so you can get an example. One I want to discuss is a spendthrift trust that protects a family from losing generational wealth after a beneficiary's divorce. Now, as I mentioned, my neighbor, had they had this in place, the wife couldn't have gotten it. The one thing you got to remember is that the advantage of having this is that you keep those assets separate, and they're going to fall to who you're related to, your kids, and then your grandkids. And that is going to ensure that your kids and grandkids don't lose the money for a lawsuit or a divorce, or God forbid, probably the worst cases I've seen is where the money passed to the child was married. In this particular situation, they had children from different marriages. The husband, who was the son, died. So now it's the wife's, and she's leaving it all to her kids. She is disinheriting his kids. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that happen. Don't let that be you. I've seen so many situations where people give money to kids or grandkids, and they just can't handle it. And I just had a conversation with a trustee who's also a beneficiary who said, I think we just give the money to everyone. And I said, well, that's not the goal of their parent. And I said, now, if this particular child, because there is a spendthrift in the family, there always is a spendthrift. I've never met a family that doesn't have a spendthrift. But I said, now, if this person were an alcoholic, would you give them an alcohol store? Well, of course not. And I said, okay, so their addiction is money. They can't manage it. If they get a penny, they spend a dime. If they get $1,000, they spend 10. So why would we give them money knowing what they're going to do? Because gosh, I've never looked at it like that. It's because, our society doesn't really dive into this, but it's so important. And these decisions literally change the financial trajectory of a spendthrift's life. So just take note and really give that some thought. One of the things that also is a huge benefit that I've seen where people have had spendthrift trusts, and almost all my clients do, even if they have kids that aren't really spendthrifts, those trusts are a little more lax, but they still have provisions to give them money so they're not going to run out of it. And it's so important as far as that proactive planning, because a lot of times that can help to prevent reactive actions where they're doing things or buying things that they really shouldn't be. Now, one of the things I just want to comment on is a lot of times people will say, okay, first of all, look, do you have any heirs that are at financial risk? This is really important. I have seen so many situations where people think their kids are doing really well, or they think this kid is really good with money, and it turns out they're not. A lot of times people want to put things in place that give them complete control. And a child or grandchild is 30 years old, and it's like, here you are in your 60s or 70s, and you've got an advisor, you've got help, but now you think because they're your grandchild and they're 30 years old or they're 40 years old, they're able to manage all of this. Sometimes it's just not a realistic expectation. So I definitely look at that. And then always consult with legal and financial advisors so that you know what you're doing is appropriate for what you want to accomplish in your situation. And make sure you're taking into account that you may not know. You may think that one of your grandchildren or children are really good financially, only to come to find out they're not. I can't tell you, and I can't get too much detail on it, but I'll just tell you, I have seen enough situations where the parent thought that the child or grandchild was just amazing financially and they had things in order and their finances were a disaster. And then you want to make sure that whatever you set up really takes into account your vision, your values, and the legacy you want to leave. It's so important. So let's recap on how and why to use a spendthrift trust. Creating your estate plan is more about creating your legacy and making sure that what you want to happen with your assets is what happens. Most people don't want their assets to be just squandered away. They want their assets to be used to really enhance people's lives, to be able to achieve their dreams, to make sure they're not going to run out of money. They're not going to be a street person. So take the time to really identify what legacy you want to create, and more importantly, how you can do it to where you can empower your child or grandchild and also protect them at the same time. I encourage you to just go back and review, looking at this from a standpoint of, again, giving your kids money, but at the same time protecting them from unforeseen lawsuits, tax liens, divorce, whatever it may be. And then really looking at some of the benefits that can not only allow you to share what you want with your kids, but also making sure that your money is being used in a way in which you yourself would be proud of how it's used and not just squandered away. And then obviously make sure that you've got an entire integrated estate plan and that you're looking at it from a standpoint, not just from estate planning, but from tax planning, retirement planning, your bigger 10,000-foot view. And then always use a team of qualified advisors. I encourage you to go to themillionaireinsider.com/support-request, or you can go to themillionaireinsider.com/SR to get some support or help in creating a spendthrift trust or an estate plan. Lastly, I want you to think about one concept. When you take time to plan wisely and really create a plan that encompasses your vision, you can create a life and a legacy you love. And that, my friends, I think is a huge part of the equation of success. I'm Annette Ba'u. All international copyrights are reserved. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now. If you love the content of this podcast, please follow and subscribe to our channel so you get notified of episodes, and also give us a 5-star review and share a comment. We really appreciate it. Congratulations on taking another step to create a financially free life you love. If you're not sure about your financial future or that it's in order, or you are ready to stop worrying about money, or possibly the fear of becoming a bag lady, ending up broke in retirement, or you simply are ready to know your financial house is in order so that you can have a bright financial future, please go to themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. And that doesn't stand for non-sufficient funds. It stands for Next Step Finance. It's the next best step of what you need to do so you can avoid an NSF notice in your future. Again, themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. The number of women who were not broke or poor while working or married is staggering. The entire mission of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast is to ensure you have the information for you, your family, your friends, anyone who's willing to listen to it and apply it so that you can create a financially free life you love. Again, themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. Until our next episode, take one action that will help you create a financially free life you love. I'm Annette Ba'u, your host. All international copyrights are reserved. Bye for now.